Hi, my name's Annette Dubrouillet, and I thought while we're all in this stay-at-home mode that I'd sit down and do something that I've been thinking about doing for a long time, and that's reading out loud from some of my favorite books from when I was a child. You can listen every day. I'll be doing another chapter of a book, and maybe several different books. Depends upon how long we're all staying at home. Today's book is one from my childhood that our teachers used to read to us in elementary school on Friday afternoons. And this was one of the series that they read, and it's called Piggle Wiggle, and it's by Betty MacDonald, and with pictures by Hilary Knight. And it's actually, it's an old book. It was written probably in the mid or early 1950s. Actually, it was written in 1947, so this book is just as old as I am. It's been around for 73 years. And as I said, our teachers used to read to us on a Friday afternoon, so that's just what I'm going to do, is just read one chapter every day, upload it, and you can come back and listen to the next chapter tomorrow. So let's start with Mrs. Piggle Wiggle. The first chapter is entitled Mrs. Piggle Wiggle Herself. I expect I might as well begin by telling you all about Mrs. Piggle Wiggle, so that whenever I mention her name, which I do very often in this book, you will not interrupt and ask, "Who is Mrs. Piggle Wiggle? What does she look like? How big is she? How old is she? What color is her hair? Is her hair long? Does she wear high heels? Does she have any children? Is there a Mr. Piggle Wiggle?" Mrs. Piggle Wiggle lives here in our town. She's very small and has a hump on her back. When children ask her about the hump, she says, "Oh, that's just a lump of magic. Sometimes it turns me into a witch, other times into a dwarf or a fairy, and on special occasions it makes me into a queen." The children are all very envious of the hump because, besides being magic, it's such a very convenient fastening place for wings. Mrs. Piggle Wiggle has brown, sparkly eyes and brown hair, which she keeps very long, almost to her knees, so the children can comb it. She usually wears it on top of her head in a knot, unless someone has been combing it, and then she has braids or long, wet curls or long hair just hanging, and with a jeweled crown or flowers on top. One day I saw her digging in the garden wearing a jeweled crown and with her hair billowing down her back. She waved gaily and said, "I promised Betsy," Betsy is one of her children friends, "that I wouldn't touch this hair until she came home from school." And she went on with her digging. Mrs. Piggle Wiggle's skin is goldy brown, and she has a warm, spicy sugar cookie smell that is very comforting to children who are sad about something. Her clothes are all brown and never look crisp and pressed because they are used for dress-up. She wears felt hats which the children poke and twist into witches' and pirates' hats, and she does not mind that at all. Sunday morning, she takes one of the hats off the closet shelf, gives it a few thumps, pulls it firmly down fore and aft, and wears it to church. She wears very high heels all the time and is glad to let the little girls borrow her shoes. Mrs. Piggle Wiggle has no family at all. She said that her husband, Mr. Piggle Wiggle, was a pirate, and after he had buried all of his treasure in the backyard, he died. She just has herself and Wag, her dog, and Lightfoot, her cat. The most remarkable thing about Mrs. Piggle Wiggle is that her house, which is upside down. It is a little brown house, and sitting there in a tangly garden, it looks like a small brown puppy lying on its back with its feet up in the air. Mrs. Piggle Wiggle says that when she was a little girl, she used to lie in bed and gaze up at the ceiling and wonder what it would be like if the house were upside down. And so when she grew up and built her own house, she had it built upside down just to see. The bathroom, the kitchen, and the staircase are right side up. They are more convenient that way. You can easily see that you could not cook on an upside-down stove or wash dishes in an upside-down sink or walk up the upside-down staircase. In the living room of our house is a large chandelier, and instead of being on the ceiling, it is on the floor. Of course, it really is on the ceiling, but the ceiling is the floor, and so it is on the floor. and the children turn on the lights and squat around it and pretend it's a campfire. Mrs. Piggle Wiggle says that her chandelier is the only one in town which is put to any real use. Her bedrooms all have slidey boards in them, because if you will look up at your attic ceiling, you will see that a slanty ceiling turned upside down makes a very fine slidey board. Also, the wall lights are very close to the floor and handy for the children. For the first 5 or 10 years after the house was built, Mrs. Piggle Wiggle climbed in and out of her rooms over the high doorways, but now she has little steps which are just the thing to practice jumping. She gives the children chalk so they can mark how far they can jump. Nobody knows how old Mrs. Piggle Wiggle is. She says she doesn't know herself. She says, "What difference does it make how old I am? I shall never grow any bigger." Mrs. Piggle Wiggle's dog, Wag, has puppies every once in a while, so she keeps a long list of names of children who want them on the blackboard board in her kitchen. For Lightfoot's, the cat's kittens, she has a long waiting list on the blackboard in the dining room. Mrs. Piggle Wiggle's backyard is full of big holes where all the children dig for Mr. Piggle Wiggle's buried treasure, and her front yard is full of flowers which all the little children jam into vases and place about her living room or carry to their teachers. For the first year after she built her house, Mrs. Piggle Wiggle lived there all by herself, except for Wag and Lightfoot, and she was very lonely. Then one dark, rainy afternoon, when she was baking sugar cookies and thinking how much fun it would be if she knew someone beside Wag and Lightfoot to invite to tea, she happened to look out of her kitchen window, and there, coming up the street in the pouring rain, dragging a big suitcase and bawling, was a little girl. Mrs. Piggle Wiggle wiped the flour off her hands and hurried right out into the rain and invited the little girl in for tea. The little girl's name was Mary Lou Robertson, and she was 8 years old, and she was running away from home. She told Mrs. Piggle Wiggle all this after she had drank 3 cups of cambric tea and had eaten 7 sugar cookies. She said, I'm running away from home because I hate to wash dishes. All I do is wash dishes. I am just a servant. Dishes, dishes, dishes. Wash, dry, put away. That's all I do. My mother doesn't love me at all. She isn't my real mother anyway. She probably got me out of an orphanage just to wash dishes. Mary Lou began to cry again, so that her 8th sugar cookie got quite soggy before she finished it. Mrs. Piggle Wiggle said, "Isn't she your real mother?" Mary Lou, "She says she is, but no real mother would make you wash dishes, wash dishes, wash dishes." "Now that's funny," said Mrs. Piggle Wiggle. "I mean, you're hating to wash dishes so much because I like to wash dishes. In fact, I enjoy washing dishes so much that because of great sorrow to me is the fact that I only have the dishes that are for Wag, Lightfoot, and me. There are only 3 or 4 dishes a meal. That is all." "When I wash dishes, Mary Lou, I pretend that I am a beautiful princess with long, golden, curly hair." Mary Lou's hair was jet black and braided into 2 stiff little pigtails. "And apple blossom skin and forget-me-not eyes. I have been captured by a wicked witch, and my only chance to get free is to wash every single dish and have the whole kitchen sparkly clean before the clock strikes. For when the clock strikes, the witch will come down and inspect to see if there is a crumb anywhere, if there are pots and pans that have been put away wet, if the silverware has been thrown in the drawer, or if the sink has not been scrubbed out. The witch will have me in her power for another year." Mrs. Piggle Wiggle looked at the clock and jumped up. "It is 10 minutes to 4, Princess, and we have so much to do. Hurry, hurry, hurry." Mary Lou jumped up also and began carrying the tea things to the sink, and Mrs. Piggle Wiggle whisked them in and out of the dishwater, and Mary Lou dried them, and Mrs. Piggle Wiggle hurried as fast as she could and put the cookie things away, and every once in a while she would stop and say, "Hark, Princess, do you hear the thump of the witch's big, gnarly cane? Mary Lou, her braids bobbing up and down with excitement, would say, I hear it. It's coming closer and closer. Soon the kitchen sparkled. The dishes were washed and dried and put away, and every crumb had been swept off the floor. Mary Lou even curled Lightfoot's tail neatly around her leg and smoothed Rag's fur. Just before the clock struck, Mrs. Piggle Wiggle said to Mary Lou, Princess, I must leave you now, but show the witch your work, and oh, I do so hope you will be freed. Then she went upstairs, and pretty soon down the stairs came a terrible old witch with a long black dress and a tall black hair and a big gnarly black cane. Mary Lou was scared until she saw the sparkly eyes of Mrs. Piggle Wiggle under the black hat. She showed the witch the kitchen, and the witch took out the cookie pans and carried them over to the light to see if they were clean and dry. She got down on her knees, squeaking like a rusty gate to see if Mary Lou had swept under the stove. She felt inside the teacups to see if there was any sugar left in the bottoms, and she put on her glasses to examine the sink. But she could not find anything wrong. So she handed Mary Lou the key to the kitchen door and screeched out, You're free, Princess, but I will get you again, never fear. The witch clumped back up the stairs, and in a few minutes, down came Mrs. Piggle Wiggle. Well, said Mrs. Piggle Wiggle, do you see why I like to wash dishes? Mary Lou said, Oh, Mrs. Piggle Wiggle, that was the most fun I've ever had. Mrs. Piggle Wiggle said, Of course, you can have more fun than I can because you have so many more dishes to wash. If only I had more dishes and could take longer, I would be a princess with curly yellow hair, apple blossom skin and blue eyes and a beautiful voice, and I would sing sad songs over the dishpan. Also, if I had more dishes, I would have the witch ride through the night on a broomstick, and I would creep out on the back porch to see if she was coming. I could hear her land with a thump on the roof, and I would slip upstairs to see if she was going to slide down the chimney or thump down the stairs. Only there would be ever so many exciting things to pretend if only I had more dishes to wash. After a while, it stopped raining and the sun came out, and Mary Lou took her suitcase and went home. That night, her mother, and it really was her mother, of course, almost fainted when she came into the kitchen exactly 27 minutes after dinner, and Mary Lou was sweeping the floor, and all the dishes were washed and dried and put away, and everything was immaculate. Mrs. Robertson rushed in and called Mary Lou's father, and he came out to the kitchen and pretended to fall on the floor with surprise. And then he said to Mary Lou's mother, I like your new maid, madam. In fact, she is so much better than the Tilly Slopwash who used to be here that I think we should invite her to a moving picture show some early evening. Then Mary Lou told them all about Mrs. Piggle Wiggle, and Mary Lou's mother said, Oh, yes, I remember that odd little house. She sounds like a charming friend, and if you are certain that she invited you, you may go over there tomorrow after school. The next day after school, Mary Lou went to see Mrs. Piggle Wiggle. She took her best friend, Kitty Wheeling, with her, and Mrs. Piggle was very glad to see them and showed them through her upside-down house and served tea and cookies. Kitty said with her mouth full of cookies, My worst trouble with bed making. I just can't get the smooth. I'd much rather wash dishes like Mary Lou, but my mom won't let me change with my sister who washes the dishes until I have learned to make the breads proper. Oh, I just despise to make the beds. Mrs. Piggle Wiggle poured herself another cup of tea, gave a saucer of cream to Lightfoot, and 4 cookies to Wag, then said, If you think you're having a hard time making beds, Kitty, imagine how hard it is for me. You see, the cruel queen sleeps in my bed every night and inspects them every morning, and if she finds a single wrinkle, even one as big as a pin, she will have me thrown down in a dungeon. Come upstairs and I will show you how I have to make the beds. They went upstairs and Mrs. Piggle Wiggle threw the covers clear off the floor of one of her own beds. Then she had Kitty help her make it up, And when they finished, it was as smooth as the floor. No wrinkles. Mrs. Piggle Wiggle said, "The secret is to throw the covers way back. You simply cannot smooth up a bed, because if you do, there might be a wrinkle down by the foot. And of course, the cruel queen will find it and then down into the dungeon." Mrs. Piggle Wiggle took the bed all apart and said, "Now, Kitty, you and Mary Lou make the bed while I tell the cruel queen you're ready for inspection." She went into the closet and shut the door. When she came out, just as Kitty and Mary Lou finished the bed, she was no longer Mrs. Piggle Wiggle, but the wicked, haughty, cruel queen. On her head she wore a glittering jewel crown. Her hair hung down her back in deep waves. Around her shoulders she had a purple fur-trimmed robe, and on her face she wore a smile so cruel it made Kitty's teeth chatter. She stalked over to the bed and lay down. With her gold slippers she felt the bottom of the bed. With her ringed fingers she felt the top and the sides. And here's a picture of the queen in the bed. She stood up with her scepter. She pulled back the spread to see if the pillows were wrinkled. Everything was perfect. The cruel queen's face became convulsed with fury. She yelled, "Not a wrinkle, not a single lump. I'm furious. But never fear, my slaves. My day will come, and into the dungeon you will go. Come, my servants, we will go." Mrs. Piggle Wiggle stalked into the closet. That was the beginning of Mrs. Piggle Wiggle's friendship with the children. The next day, Mary Lou and Kitty's little brother Bobby, and Bobby's friend Dickie went to Mrs. Piggle Wiggle's for tea. And the next day they came, and each brought someone else, and pretty soon every single child in the town had been or was going to Mrs. Piggle Wiggle's house. She showed Bobby how to sneak out and get fireplace logs without being caught by the Indians. She showed Dickie how a lawnmower is really a magic machine that mows down enemies millions and billions at a time. She taught Susan how to take out the ashes without making a sound and without leaving a trace, to show the train robbers who were on her trail and that she and the sheriff had camped there that night. Mrs. Piggle Wiggle certainly knew how to make work fun. She also knew that there were certain kinds of work that children loved to do, even though they did not know how very well, like painting and ironing and cooking and carpentry. One day at Mrs. Piggle Wiggle's, there were 2 little children baking cookies. One little child baking a pie and getting flour on the floor and eating most of the dough. A little boy ironing in a very wrinkly fashion. All of Mrs. Piggle Wiggle's clean clothes. 4 children with paint on their face and feathers in their hair, chopping kindling. 2 children painting the doghouse, and 3 children darning old pirate socks of Mr. Piggle Wiggle's. And pirates everywhere, digging in the backyard, shooting and yelling, running through the house, and grabbing hanks of raw cookie dough. Mrs. Piggle Wiggle was sitting in the corner over in the living room sewing on doll clothes. She was wearing the jeweled crown, and Kitty Wheeling was standing beside her throne, which was a chair with a tablecloth draped over it, dipping her hairbrush in a glass of water and making Mrs. Piggle Wiggle's hair into long, wet curls. Kitty said, "Your Highness, I used to use the gold or the silver hairpins today." Mrs. Piggle Wiggle said, "Oh, let's use the ones with the diamonds in them, hairdresser. They look better with this crown." Just then the telephone rang, and it was some mother wanting to know what to do with her little girl who wouldn't take a bath. And that is how Mrs. Piggle Wiggle got started with her wonderful cures. She told Hubert's mother about the won't pick up the toys cure, Patsy's mother about the radish cure, Alan's mother about the slow eater tiny bite taker cure, Anne and Joan's mother about the fighter quarrelers cure, Dick's mother about the selfish boy cure, Mary's mother about the answer back cure, and Bobby and Larry and Susan's mother about the never want to go to bedders cure. And that is the end of Chapter 1 of Mrs. Piggle Wiggle. Join me tomorrow and we'll read Chapter 2. Bye.